Thanks for getting the greetings started in the chat. And Micah has invited others to do the same, to follow suit. Well, welcome, friends. It is so good to be with you. Welcome to our January Quaker Changemaker event on our priorities process, which is at the heart of what we do at FCNL. My name is Lauren Brownlee. I am FCNL's Deputy General Secretary, and I am a member of Baltimore Friends. I'm a member of Bethesda Friends Meeting and Baltimore Yearly Meeting. And we are today talking about setting Quaker lobbying priorities for the 119th Congress. Before we get into it, I would like to ask my colleague Micah to share how we'll gather this evening.
Hello, friends. My name is Micah McClellan-Nicholson, and I am the Program Assistant for Quaker Outreach here at FCNL, and I am going to be running technology for this event. So before we start with our regular programming, just some tech considerations. As I've already put a message in, say hello in the chat. You're invited to share your name, your pronouns, your location, and also a land acknowledgement. You can use the resource that I sent, native/land.ca, to learn what native land you are on if you are not already familiar. As you can see, we are recording this event, only the speakers portions though. So audience members will not be recorded. So if you want to turn off your camera for privacy reasons, please feel free to. But if not, feel free to keep your cameras on. You will also not be able to unmute during the section. If you want to send questions into the chat, we will have a Q&A section later on in our programming that we will answer some of those questions. So please feel free to if questions arise, since this is a process we hope you will do it within your own communities. Captioning also is available automatically. If you do not want to see, you can click more in your Zoom toolbar, go to captions, and then click either hide subtitles if you don't want to see them, or show subtitles if you want to see them. As I mentioned, you'll have time for questions at the end once our speakers get through their structured program of their wonderful information. And a consideration for phone participants, since I saw that we have some friends joining using their telephones. If you're calling in on your phone and during the question segment, you would like to ask a question, you can press *9 to raise your hand during our Q&A portion. We will unmute you, and then you are invited to ask your questions via telephone, and then we will remute you so that we can maintain that virtual silence. If you have any questions during our programming, please contact me via the Zoom chat, and/or you can message me via email at M as in Mary Nicholson, like Jack Nicholson, at fcnl.org. And I will put that email in the chat so that you have it. But back to you, Lauren.
Thank you. And as we begin, I will just invite us into a few breaths of some settling silence together. Thank you, friends. Welcome again to what I think is going to be a really fabulous panel that we have for you. We are talking about one of my favorite distinctive characteristics about the Friends Committee on National Legislation, which is our legislative priorities process. As many of you know, every 2 years, FCNL asks friends around the country for help in setting the focus for our advocacy work, which helps to ground our witness in Quaker discernment and ensure that our witness as an organization is responsive to the concerns of friends communities throughout the United States. Starting this month and through mid-April, you and your communities can participate in this discernment process that influences the priorities that we will advocate for in the next Congress starting in January 2025. The guiding document that Quaker groups choose which priorities to focus on comes from our foundational legislative statement, The World We Seek. And that is the little blue book that you may have seen in the past that is now largely online, and certainly the most updated version of it, including our reproductive health statement as of November, is only available online. Or if you print it. This statement, as I said, was recently updated at annual meeting this past fall to include a newly revised statement on reproductive health and abortion. And we will talk about the overall priorities process and the unique experience that Friends and FCNL had in adopting the new policy language over the course of the last year. Joining me for this conversation are 3 friends who have different expertise in these subjects. I am thrilled to welcome the previous clerk of FCNL's policy committee, Ebby Luvaga, who is a hero to many of us, the current clerk of the policy committee, Genie Stowers, who has been an incredible leader even before she became clerk of the policy committee, and her Associate General Secretary for Policy and Advocacy, Amelia Keegan, who in many circles needs no introduction because she is such a force of nature and a force for good on behalf of Friends communities. So to let you know a little bit more about each of them, Amelia Keegan leads FCNL's strategic legislative advocacy and organizing work. Prior to her role as Associate General Secretary for Policy and Advocacy, she served as FCNL's Legislative Director for Domestic Policy, guiding the domestic policy team's work in analyzing legislation, advocating on Capitol Hill, and developing legislative strategy. Amelia has worked at a variety of other national nonprofits in DC and Chicago, focusing on federal budget, tax, and low-income policy. Before coming to FCNL, Amelia spent 6 years at Bread for the World as the Deputy Director of Government Relations. Amelia received a Bachelor of Arts in Government from Smith College and a Juris Doctorate from the University of Washington School of Law. She is a member of the Illinois Bar. Amelia, we are every day grateful that you are with us. Thank you for being a part of this conversation. Genie Stowers is a convinced friend attracted by Quaker values and activism. She is now a member of the Berkeley Society of Friends, Quakers of the Pacific Yearly Meeting, where she has been clerk and treasurer. She is also the co-coordinator of the Berkeley-San Francisco FCNL advocacy team and serves on the new Strategic Vision Committee of the American Friends Service Committee. After working in government and domestic violence agencies, she went back to graduate school to earn a PhD in political science, specializing in public policy and keeping with her concerns about working to improve policies for everyone. Today, she is a professor of public administration at the School of Public Affairs and Civic Engagement at San Francisco State University. Genie, again, so grateful that you were here and so grateful for your leadership. And Ebby Luvaga was born and raised in Kenya in a Quaker family. Her father served as the presiding clerk of the East African Yearly Meeting North, and her mother served in various positions, including recording clerk in the Maliki Monthly Meeting in Western Kenya. Ebby is now a member of Ames Monthly Meeting, Iowa Yearly Meeting Conservative. She was a member of the FCNL Policy Committee for 6 years, serving bravely, I might add, as clerk of the policy committee for the last 3 years until November 2023. Ebby is a teaching professor of economics at Iowa State University, teaching economic development, advising undergraduate students, and leading study abroad programs to many countries, including Argentina, Australia, Panama, Spain, Rome, the United Arab Emirates. She received her PhD in economic education from Ohio University in Athens, Ohio, which is where my mother went to college as well, where she attended the Athens meeting. Ebby, your leadership has been transformative for this organization, and we are so grateful that you are on the panel with us tonight. I am so excited to be in conversation with each of you about this priorities process, what it is, how it works, why it matters, and how communities can participate in this nationwide collective discernment. I am looking forward to hearing your inspiring stories of bringing friends together through this process. So the first question that we have is, how does it work? Can you explain generally how the process works in Quaker communities? And at FCNL specifically, what is the discernment process that we're using around these priorities? What do friends in our audience need to know about how to start this discernment in their communities? And Jeannie, we'll start with you.
Yes, well, thank you very much, Lauren, for those great introductions. We think of this as the context is like a pyramid. We start everything with, I can never do this, the world we seek, which is, I can't get a picture of my screen. The document that provides our overall policy guidance. This next step that we are beginning to engage in gets down into more specifics for this particular legislative congressional session. And so we do that so that we're providing additional guidance to staff. So as bills come up and issues emerge, they can use both the world we seek and then the priorities that we come up with for this congressional session to identify which bills they're going to focus on to lobby on. So materials and instructions went out to meetings, churches, and other Quaker organizations early this month on how to structure the process in each of your organizations. From those materials, which include written statements of the process and guidelines about how to focus and structure the process, as well as FCNL's statement on diversity, equity, and inclusion. We are hoping now that meetings, churches, and organizations will have calls for participation in their own organization for discernment sessions where anybody can make suggestions about policy issues that in today's environment they think should be part of FCNL's legislative priorities. For your information, the legislative priorities from earlier legislative sessions are online on the FCNL website. We are asking this year that each group provide only 5 priorities, and this submission will be done on a website, so that after everyone in your group contributes, you would discern just 5 of those and narrow down the list of contributions to just 5. The convener of each of the groups then should provide that input to FCNL through the website, if at all possible. The website form, and I think we're going to be providing the website address for that in a few moments, will have boxes 1 through 5 for each of the 5 legislative priorities. And for each one, we're asking you to identify the section of the world we seek that it falls into. And those sections are Section 1, World Free from War, Section 2, Equity and Justice, Section 3, Every Person's Potential, and Section 4, An Earth Restored. So there'll be a box for the priority that you are suggesting, and then below that, another box with a drop-down menu that says you want Section 1, 2, 3, or 4. The form also asks about how many individuals participated in your process, a distribution by age group, the name of the group. And then for the first time this year, we are also asking about what connections your group might have to any of the issues that you are listing as a priority. This could be lived experience, perhaps with a healthcare issue or with poverty, or any activist engagement that anyone or your meeting has with any of these issues, like on climate change or anti-racism work. We are asking that the submissions be made by April 15th online through that website. So you have until now through April. For instance, our session is set for the first day in March. And that will give us time to work on the priorities if we need to, and still get submitted by April 15th. So that's an overview of the process for you. And we can answer any questions about that after we go through our other questions here.
Thank you so much. I think you explained that in a way that was very clear to me. And Amelia, I'm going to ask you to talk about what happens next. So Jeannie's talked about the discernment that happens in meetings. Can you talk about the steps from the submission, the moment of submission, to what happens with the policy committee, what happens at annual meeting?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and it's so wonderful to see you all, and thank you for joining on this Wednesday evening. Let me first I want to build a little bit more into what Jeannie was talking about, the difference between the statement of legislative policy, the World We Seek document, which is now the most updated version online, and the legislative priorities. This is FCNL's like general position on whatever we take a position on all the policies. And the legislative priorities are those things that FCNL staff will actually lobby on and cover in some way. And so there's a lot in here that we might sign on to letters or something else but we don't actually really follow or cover because we need to prioritize. There's a lot in the World We Seek. And so that's what this process is about. So the logistics of the process. So after meetings and friends and Quaker groups submit their make their submissions in the online form, then the policy committee goes through and reads all of those submissions. Usually we get between 200 and 250 submissions, and the policy committee members really diligently read through those and really discern from that what are friends calling FCNL to work on and to prioritize in the next Congress, and really trying to discern where the spirit is leading on this. And I one of the things that I really appreciate is how how much policy committee members really take this process very seriously and make sure that it is a spirit-led process. And from there, at their June meeting, they come up with a draft that then goes for getting feedback. And there's a various process of getting feedback and going through revisions and putting out revised documents. And so there are usually listening sessions for general committee members in the summer to get feedback on the initial draft. Staff provide feedback on, given what they know about what the opportunities are on the Hill, or where there are staff expertise, or what our resource constraints might be. They provide feedback. And so the priorities go through a few drafts, and then ultimately comes before general committee in November at annual meeting, where there's then further time for seasoning and discernment. And there's usually some additional revisions that take place potentially in the late hours at annual meeting. And then ideally general committee approves the priorities process in November.
Thank you so much, Amelia, and thank you to Micah for putting that link in the chat for everyone. So people can at any point go to FCNL.org/priorities to find those instructions on how to participate and resources to prepare your community for this discernment, as well as clear directions about how to submit the priorities. And if you have any questions at any point in the process, you can reach out to Quakers@FCNL.org. And Micah has put that in the chat as well. Thank you so much, Micah. Our next question is around the power of engaging in this process that draws upon our Quaker principles and practices. So communal discernment of spirits leadings is a Quaker practice as old as we believe that the Friends tradition, the Friends faith is itself. How do you see this process as a unique part of FCNL's Quaker identity, and how is it different from other collaborative agenda setting approaches? And Ebby, this time we'll start with you.
Yeah, thank you, Lauren, and thank you, everyone. Good evening. It's a pleasure to be here tonight and to participate on this panel. I in just thinking back, sometimes as Quakers we probably take our process for granted, and it's a really deep-rooted process that I believe can be applied to literally anything that we are discussing or anything that we would like to reach some form of unity, or what we are seeking unity on. So for instance, we talk about discernment. The discernment process as a group or as individuals is very, very, very important, and just not reserved for challenging issues, but I think as Quakers, that's a process that we need to use in every situation, and when we are asked to respond or be able to discuss the priorities. So again, discernment, very important. Now, silent worship, we kind of do that very naturally. We start off with a little silent worship, and that guides us Quakers in terms of just listening deeply, focusing on that inner reflection and the inner light for guidance. And I see that as a key part of the Quaker process that can and should be brought to the priorities process. Now, speaking in silence, that's another one that I don't know how many meetings or friends' churches really continue to use that process during priorities, but I would hope that when the documents we got, there are usually some queries included, which end up being very important in this process, because serving on the policy committee, I know for 6 years, I know the process itself within the policy committee on how we arrived at some of the documents or the information that we send to the meetings. Consensus building, we don't really have to, as friends, sometimes people have asked me, you know, Quakers, you talk about this consensus building, why don't you just take a vote? And so I have to sometimes explain to my friends that it's just part of our process. And I've seen some friends who think it's a very good idea and it's a good way of trying to come up with some decision making on issues. And another thing that I believe is important for us Quakers, and what we hopefully continue to do naturally, is just having respect for one another. And as we try to be patient and open to these issues. And I know after we just concluded our reproductive health care session, that was a really challenging issue, and Quakers were able to work through that. But that is not the only time that we need to be patient about things and openness. Chances are your favorite priority may not end up making to the list. And I would just like to ask friends to trust the process. So trusting the process is also very, very important. Thanks, Lauren.
Thank you. Amelia, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a special and unique thing about FCNL and our work. You know, you think about a lot of other organizations and how do they decide what they're going to focus on, what their legislative priorities are. It's usually like decided by staff or a board. It's like given to the people who are part of that network. And this is so unique in that, and sometimes maybe there's a vote, right? Some like an online vote or something. And this is so different. And it's such a special, like, it is for me such a privilege to be able to witness that whole process of seeing, you know, the hundreds of responses, and you might have 250 responses, and then each of those might give 3 or 5 different priorities. We're eliminating it to 5 this year, different priorities. And from that huge kind of plethora of friends kind of sharing discernment processes that they've gone through in their meetings and groups, to this document that, you know, has that is oftentimes just so beautifully written. And that is a really, really special part of how FCNL goes about its work. And then to have that further refined, and oftentimes kind of we start with what I think is a pretty good document, pretty strong. And then by the end of the process, it's like, wow, this is even so much more powerful and so much stronger. And so it's really just enormous. It's just such an enormous privilege to watch that process unfold. And as Ebby said, to really kind of let go and let the process work and let spirit emerge. And so that's always I think a really unique thing. And when I tell colleagues in other organizations about this process, they're just dumbfounded. They're so amazed that, like, what, you go through this year-long process, and then at the end of the day you have general committee that kind of there has to be a sense of the meeting that overall adopts these priorities of what FCNL. It's just so counter to so many of the ways that a lot of organizations and a lot of our society run.
Thank you. I entirely agree. And I can add that this year I got a window into that process of discernment when we were talking about the reproductive health and abortion policy. And I described it as one of the most spirit-filled experiences I have ever had. The care that the policy committee took to work with integrity around what they were hearing and to distill that was so powerful. And it was one of the moments I have felt most connected to Quakers all around the country. So what you're saying resonates with me. And I want to hear, Genie, your thoughts as well about why this process matters and how it's been significant for you and your community.
Well, thank you, Lauren. And building on what Amelia says, to me, way before I got involved in FCNL myself, I was so impressed that our meeting did this like every 2 years and participated in this. And, I thought, gosh, this organization actually is asking our opinion on what they lobby. And it made me want to be part of them. And it was one reason that I sought out FCNL and, started going to annual meetings. I think it's a very empowering process, for us, working at the grassroots, taking a spirit-led process and trying to discern what we think is important. And the idea that people across the country are doing the same thing, I think is really cool. And very empowering. And I think it helps our meeting feel part of something greater than ourselves and feel like we are contributing to something at, the national level. Also at our local level, at our meeting, for instance, it's interesting to have these policy discussions every year. As Quakers, we don't always verbalize our views on things. And so it's nice to have these opportunities, like we had last year or other years on legislative priorities, where we really dig in deep and say, this is what we believe, this is what we think is important, and this is what we think FCNL, should be working on. So for me, it's something I always look forward to. Lauren, back to you.
Why, thank you. Such meaningful reflections all. And I'm going to turn now to that newest addition to our policy statement, which is our reproductive healthcare and abortion policy statement. And would like to ask you, Ebby, if you could share with us about what edits were made to the statement, how much of an impact does this have on this year's priorities process? And then also just a little bit about the fact that it's unusual to have this kind of change to the policy statement itself as opposed to the priorities within the policy statement. And so if you could talk a little bit about that, how did that end up happening last year? And then what was that process that you used when we saw that friends were challenged by this topic, that there was not initially clarity? How did you move toward that clarity? So anything you could help us understand about this evolution of our policy statement and its impact on this priorities.
Yeah, thank you, Lauren, for that question. And partly because now, since we made the change to the policy statement, which is the blue book, The World We Seek, now abortion and healthcare is part of the issues that you can actually have a conversation about regarding the priorities. Now, with this, the language, it was a year-long process. Actually, it was longer than a year, the more I think about it. But the good thing is, as Quakers, we already had a process in place. This process that you're going to engage in, the priorities process, was very, very helpful, extremely helpful in helping us come up with the revisions. And with that, we just followed that process. We sent out information to friends, asked for discernment, held listening sessions. The policy committee met several times. They reviewed, like Amelia was talking about, the policy committee will be reviewing the submissions from friends. We followed that entire process and we found that to be extremely, extremely helpful. So you find that even though we had some things regarding women and children already in the policy statement in other areas, but this particular one was very, very important, and it took a while for us to reach to a point where friends affirmed, and I'm sure for some of you who were at annual meeting probably noticed some friends stepped aside, which is part of the Quaker process. And the Quaker process doesn't mean that we all have to agree or come to unity, because there are those who may not be in unity with what is being discussed. But again, because we do have a process in place, that ended up being extremely, extremely helpful. So as we go through this, again, like Lauren said, what was changed was in the policy statement, the Blue Book, and usually we don't do that on an annual basis. So the policy, the priorities are every 2 years, and then the policy statement, I think the last time we revised it, it had been, who knows, 9 years. I can't remember exactly how long, but it was that long for us to look at it the last time. But then following that, we ended up revising, and I see that I think Micah has posted the new language in there, and I don't know if I need to read it because of time, but you can see that one of the major changes was to acknowledge and literally to add that section, change it to spell it out and say reproductive health and abortion. That was very important to spell that out. And also, it was very important to point out how FCNL will oppose the criminalization of people who are seeking or undergoing abortion services, and then also pointed out that we support equitable access to abortion. And that part of equity and equitable access was also in response to paying attention to some members of communities who may not have access to those services. So again, this was a very, very important step for FCNL, and I was very pleased to be part of this. So moving forward, again, like I said, you are now, since it's part of the policy statement, you can go ahead and have a conversation about abortion being part of the priorities. So, but the work is not done. The work is not done. And who knows, some edits may end up being made down the road. I'm not sure. When we come up to revising the full policy statement, that could become something that may need some attention. But this process just highlighted the power of Quaker process. And I keep reminding people, Quakers have a way of trying to figure out and work through challenging issues, as they've done through the years. So again, yeah, I look forward to seeing what the priorities are going to come out this year, and it'll be exciting to see what friends end up identifying, if this is gonna end up being one of the priorities that will come up. So thank you for your work on this, Law.
Thank you. Okay. We're gonna turn to some of the audience questions for a period, and then end with some advice from our panelists about taking on this process. Just want to underscore the messages that I heard from our panelists about how important the spirit-led discernment is at every level, every step of this process, and the invitation for friends to think of the process itself as a gift, that this opportunity to be in conversation with our friends communities, first individually as friends communities, and then coming together can really be clarifying for us individually, for us as unique Quaker communities, and then as a whole FCNL community. And as we were planning for this session, I was saying, I think it can be such a gift for Quaker communities to go through this process of discernment and thinking about what is most important to them, even if the things that they identified as their priorities don't all show up on the final list of priorities, that recognizing what matters to us as a community can help us navigate how to do work in that area, because the world needs all of us to be doing all that we are called to do. And so even if that looks a little bit different from what others are called to do, owning our unique contributions to the world, I think, is an important aspect of what this process can invite us into. And so with that, we will take questions. I see that Stephen has a hand up. So Stephen, if you wanted to unmute and ask you a question, that'd be great.
Yes. Okay, great. Thank you, Lauren. And Ebby, I was participated in that process at least in November, and I was both proud to be a friend watching the process way out, and to witness how you led us in Quaker process. I'm also aware that there were friends who were likely to do more than just stand aside, but probably leave FCNL, if not Quakerism, totally. And I wondered how that impacted the deliberations that friends had behind the scenes, so to speak. That's one question. The other question was to ask you to go back to your initial statements about the process. Right? You kind of zoom through them, and as to make it relevant to us discerning what our meetings are going to list as priorities, it's relevant. I participate in one meeting where it's like pulling teeth just to have friends participate in second hour forums, be they burned out, or they don't have time to come, or they just don't want to get involved, or they're so totally focused on one issue like Gaza. Those folks we might be able to get involved more easily. But I'm wondering about the value of maybe starting off this process on using email. And that question's to you, Ebby, but everybody.
Thank you. Abby, if you would like to get started with some answers, and then we can have other panelists chime in.
Yes. Why don't I'll just go back to the first question regarding the process and how, yes, there were some friends who I hope they don't leave FCNL because of this these revisions to the policy statement. Now, going back with the background and meeting with the policy committee, discerning prayerfully and thinking through, the key issue was friends have been faced with challenging issues. This is not probably the first time. Even when it comes to issues of war, peace and war, friends have had challenges and still probably continue. So we had that help guide us. And again, it was a whole year-long process. So coming to annual meeting was the tail end of a very long, thoughtful, discerned, and attempt to consensus building, listening, and reviewing a lot and revising a lot of submissions from friends. So really, we looked at it as the end of a very long process, which we hoped had been open and had been deliberate. We hoped that friends will see that we were passionate and very caring about each other, and we even listened to voices that really were not expressive of their own will. And sometimes it's easy to see those who are speaking up and not be able to pay attention to those who are silently and prayerfully deliberating and working through the process. So yes, I would just ask friends to always think about what Quakers have stood for many, many years. And I think that is what ended up guiding us a lot. And also, we felt the energy and the prayers from everyone. You are all holding us in the light, and we could feel that. And that's why even towards the end, when it came to what do we do now, there was no question from the committee that we were not going to proceed with the statement that we had, and that is why we brought it forth to the floor. Now, regarding the process, I'm gonna probably turn this back to Lauren and see how the current policy committee wants to proceed with, especially those, if starting via email is even a good option. I would defer that to Lauren and see how you, or Jeannie, one of you can respond to that, please. So Stephen, I don't know if I answered your question, but hopefully that gives you a little bit of perspective. And I know I had gone through very quickly on some of the Quaker process stuff, but we could probably talk about that another time.
I think that is a great answer. And I would just add to your answer about that first question, that what I witnessed as someone who witnessed that discernment was the policy committee coming from a place of love and not fear. I think it was really tempting to be operating from that place of how do we not lose people. And what I heard them calling themselves to is really listening to what was coming through the community messages and listening for spirit in that, and letting that guide them. And it was so powerful to watch. Jeannie,
Yes.
you were both a part of that process, and you're
Yes.
in this process. And I'm wondering if you could both answer that question about this process
Yeah.
that Stephen shared, but also the question that's in the chat about the process as well.
Okay. So on what a great question. On the first one, I also just want to chime in and say, we talked about this a lot, whether we were going to lose people. And I think the thing that I recall is coming back to over and over again, the silence from FCNL on this issue was deafening. And we received so much input from meetings that not saying anything on abortion was saying something, and that we really needed to speak up as Quakers. And that's, I think, what gave us the courage to move forward. We were nervous about it. Everyone was nervous about it. But as I think what happened last year in the process really helped us learn some lessons that are important for us going forward. And the first of them is that don't avoid these hard questions and these hard discussions. You know, many of us in our meetings are having hard discussions right now about the violence and war in the Middle East. And, you know, I know meetings that are avoiding talking about that. And, you know, what we learned last year is that it's important not to avoid them. You know, so many meetings last year came back to us afterwards and said they were so nervous about it, and they were so glad that they had the conversation. So glad they had the conversation, that they had no idea what their friends thought about this and what they had experienced, and that it became a very rewarding and spiritual process. So I think that is something, a lesson for us all as we go forward. In terms of how to organize, I think there are several ways, and I think it depends on your meeting or church. My own meeting is, we are dedicating a meeting of our Social and Environmental Action Committee to this and inviting anybody to come to this. Some meetings have this discernment as part of their meeting for business. And I think that's a good way to ensure that there are adequate, you know, friends. I'm not quite sure what you mean about starting with email, you know, but I think I don't know, I think that that might be more difficult to, you know, attain the kind of spirit-led discernment that, you know, we might, you know, that we are really looking for. And that perhaps, you know, another way would be to try having it in a meeting for business and setting aside, you know, much as we do for our state of the meeting report every year, just setting aside a part of the meeting for that. Let's see, is that the part of the question that was in the meeting?
Yeah, and one other question for you,
Uh,
Jeannie, that has come up is, we're asking for 5 priorities
right.
per,
Oh,
but
okay.
there will, that it's the policy committee is not looking to get to a total of 5.
No, we are not, no. But that's, the number is part of the discernment process. You know, last year or 2 years ago, I guess, when we did this, we recombined and actually, if you look at the way that the priorities for the 118th Congress are set out, they're no longer listed because that was, in fact, it's a big, very nicely graphic design, kind of in a circular fashion. Many friends were concerned about what was listed last and what was listed first and what that meant. And so we tried to get around a listing because that implied a priority. And the ultimate list is really not set out in terms of number 1 is our first priority and number 2 is our second priority. And so that graphic design allows us to do that. But the number of priorities is part of what the policy committee discerns as we go forward.
Thank you. And then I just wanted to note too, there was a question about whether meetings or whether friends who are submitting their priorities can add nuance to them. And I think the answer is yes, that there is open space for people to not
Yes,
just put what the priority is, but any nuance that feels important to include in that as
yes, there is a comments box. Yes.
Thank you. And so now as we come toward the end of our time together, I'm going to ask each of our panelists to briefly share some advice. What is the big takeaway that you would like people to have about this process? Is there anything you want people to be thinking about as they head in? And Amelia, we'll start with you this time and then go to Jeannie and then Ebby.
Sure. Yeah, I would say, I mean, one of the things that policy committee always talks about and grapples with is this desire that friends have that FCNL address every legislative issue that is out there. And so there are always a lot of requests to kind of expand the number of priorities we have. And I think it's just a reminder that we have real resource constraints. And so even though I would say, just as friends have said earlier, even though you might not see exactly the priorities that you listed in the document, does not necessarily mean that policy committee members have not considered that. There's a lot that policy committee is trying to weigh, like, can we, real resources constraints, can we afford to hire a bunch more lobbyists on a bunch more topics? And it's not just lobbying staff, right? It's also all the other support to take on those issues, like communications bandwidth, and how many emails can you handle in your inbox, and how many lobby visits can folks in the network do on how many issues. And so just remembering that we really can only focus in on so many issues, and we have real resource constraints and expertise. We have lobbyists who come to FCNL who have a particular area of expertise. It takes a time to develop that area of expertise, and to know those coalitions and the particular staffers on the Hill. And so recognizing those pieces, as well as, like, where is there opportunity for movement on the Hill, and what is FCNL's value added? What can we bring to that issue area that is a comparative advantage that other groups might not have. And so those are all sort of things. And the fact that FCNL is focused on moving legislation on Capitol Hill in Congress, federal legislation. And so there are a lot of issues that are really state-specific issues too. So those are all some of the other constraints that go into this. And I think just being aware of some of those constraints and limitations, and that we're constantly we're designed to work towards incremental change. That's sort of the way FCNL is built and designed. And the other final piece of advice I will share is that it is, I will say, generally speaking, a lot easier for broad language for staff to work, because that gives staff flexibility to be able to lean in when there's opportunity. So for example, the economic justice priority talks about a lot of different areas within economic justice. The child tax credit is going to be voted on in the House in like 30 minutes. And so there isn't specific language in there talking about the child tax credit, but because of the language is broad enough, that allows FCNL staff to really lean in and make a big push, because there's this opportunity to expand the child tax credit. Same on Israel-Palestine. You look at the priorities, and it doesn't specifically name Israel-Palestine, but FCNL staff have interpreted that to be able to go all in when October 7th happened, and to be able to respond with a big efforts to call for a ceasefire. So I would just, FCNL, the broad language, just because you might not see a specific policy named, doesn't mean it's not included, or that FCNL will not interpret some of that as they are reading the priority. So those are my pieces of advice.
Thank you very much, Jeannie.
Yes, so some of this is we've already said, but don't be afraid to have the hard discussions, but make sure it's done in a spiritual way. This is not, the local issues discussion down at, the local political club. It should be done with respect and, in a spiritual fashion. And the decision-making process is one that friends use, in making decisions, even though it's a different kind of discussion. But don't be afraid of possible conflict. In my mind, that makes it more interesting. We have more discussions and we learn more about what each other thinks. The other thing is that this year we're very interested in hearing what you all have to say about community connections to the issues. This came up as a way of us starting to try to implement the guidelines in diversity, equity, inclusion into all of our processes. And so we're very interested to hear about what kind of actions members of your community have been active in around the issues that you think are a priority, and how your members and attenders might have lived experience with some of these issues. So please include that material as well. There will be opportunities after the policy committee has discerned an initial draft, particularly for members of the general committee, but also for individuals who attend the annual meeting to continue to comment on and help discern these priorities as we all go forward. So your participation is much appreciated, and we're looking forward to the process.
Thank you. And we're at time. So Ebby, I'm going to ask you to speak concisely.
Okay, just a couple of things. One, I would tell friends to start early. It's very, very helpful. And then attend the listening sessions like this one. So that way, I'm suspecting they'll have some after the initial submission. So watch out for that and attend those, because I know that the policy committee takes this process very, very seriously. And then finally, I know we always use process observers quite a bit in this kind of settings. So you may want to try that, especially if you're going to meet several times. Having a process observer to help you for when you meet the next time may be helpful. So thank you again for attending this evening.
And thank you. Thank you, Ebby. Thank you, Jeannie. Thank you, Amelia. Thank you, Micah. Thank you, everyone who asked questions or shared reflections. And thank you to everyone who is here and is willing to be a part of this process with us. Every one of us makes a difference in this. And with that, I will turn things back over to Micah.
I too, although I'm young, have tech issues sometimes. But thank you all for joining us this evening. I will be sending right now in the chat some upcoming events that we have. You can see all of our events at fcnl.org/events. One to highlight is Intro to Advocacy, which is happening on February 15th. Which is a wonderful place to start if you have not done advocacy or lobbying with us before. And also, I encourage you to mark in your calendars our next Quaker Changemakers event, which will be next month, February 28th. We will get that posting up on the website very shortly for you to register. It will be on the Black Quaker Project. No, my mind. So many things that we do here at FCNL. It will be on Hassan and Bridget's trip out to the Middle East that they just returned, very thankfully, safely back from. So they will be reporting out from their trip. So thank you all for joining us. And if you have any outstanding questions, as I mentioned, please feel free to send them to quakers@fcnl.org. Yes, so thank you all.